Hey guys, it's been a while. Time for another ramble. So, in my last ramble, I was saying that what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza, is a genocide, right? And I said, at the time, with 10,000 people dead, 10 times what was killed in the attack on October 7th, which is Israel's 9/11, pretty much, that was about 0.5% of the population of Gaza. And I posed the question, like, if you don't believe that that's a genocide, quote unquote, then what percentage of those people dying would do it for you? Because then we got to up from 0.5%, we went to 1% at 20,000, and then we went to 1.5% at 30,000, and now we're at 2% at 40,000 dead, approximately. And I still, will hold out that question for anybody who doesn't think that this is a genocide. What percentage of them dying is going to do it for you? But what I really want to talk about in this video, apart from my previous video on the subject, which I felt was one of my most heartfelt videos ever, right? Like, as far as what are my good videos, my good rambles that I put out. That's why I made the video. I don't come back to YouTube unless I feel like I have something to give. So, this time I want to talk about the protests in America that have sprung up on a few college campuses, starting with Columbia University, and then, even here in Denver on the Aurora campus, which has, a bunch of different universities and colleges on it. They had about 100 protesters with tents and stuff, and it's been going on for like 4 days now. They had 40 to 100 arrests, depending on who you ask, and yeah. I was just happy to see a response from Bisan on TikTok, this lady that she has become a de facto war correspondent for a lot of us who are just watching this unfold on social media as the best source of information firsthand. And Bisan made a video saying that she felt the solidarity from the protests at different college campuses, like Columbia and USC and whatnot. And I was just happy that Bisan was alive. Of all the different people in Gaza, the 2 million people that are, undergoing this horrible time in history, like, that one person means everything to me. Like, if Bisan dies, we all revolt. Anyways, the protests themselves reminded me of one of the peaks of my own personal activism, which is borne out on my YouTube channel, which, if you're watching my YouTube channel and have over, the 15 years that I've been on here, you know that I was supporting the Occupy movement in Colorado Springs and Denver specifically, but the broader movement as well in the time that it was going. And I've offered, a lot of rethinking of what we were doing back then here on this channel. And, looking back, there are things that I would have changed, but I did at least get a lot of friendships out of that time and met a lot of politically active people and went on to do some things that I feel like a lot of protesters maybe didn't do. But you've seen some of those things here on my channel. I was a delegate for political parties. I, did a lot of filming of assemblies in that capacity. I have dedicated my career to mental health and do a lot on the side of that as far as helping out charities and whatnot. And I feel like I'm helping my community, and a lot of that I owe to learning how to be a protester and be active in my community from the Occupy movement. And I see this new movement, this protesting of the Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip, Palestine, whatever you want to call it. I see this protest movement in America having parallels with the Occupy movement. First and foremost, the fact that they are occupying public spaces as a form of protest. And the irony that they are protesting what is essentially also an occupation, it's not lost on me. It's kind of weird that that's how they want to go about this. But I think more than occupying, they're seeking in their motives a divestment from Israel, from the places that they are occupying right in front of. So we could say divestment is the actual thing that they're trying to achieve, not just like occupying the courtyard outside their school. So, but there have been some incidents of like police being locked out of buildings and the protesters holding buildings and stuff just in the past week, and it's not getting a lot of mainstream news coverage, but what do you want? This is the phase of protest movements where they say they're intentionally not trying to show us on TV, and there's like stages of it where like first they deny us, then and eventually they have to recognize us, whatever. There's so many different like iterations of those platitudes. But I want to talk about like what could these protesters that are wanting to occupy the courtyards of their universities and get their universities to divest from relationships with Israel, what could they learn from previous movements such as the Occupy movement and Black Lives Matter, right? So the first thing I would look to is like their messaging and their focus, right? I feel like they're particularly focused on divestment right now, stopping the war through like using these financial pressures on Israel, right? The Occupy movement primarily focused on economic inequality and the corporate influence on politics, which was very broad, right? But the Black Lives Matter protests centered around racial justice and ending police brutality and systemic racism, which could be broad, but I think it was mostly focused on police brutality, which was, I feel like a much narrower focus. And so long as they keep it about the divestment and the just ending the war in Gaza, the whatever you want to call, like I'm calling it war, but like the occupation of Gaza, like if they keep it centered on that and don't add other things to their protests, they'll serve themselves well. Because when I was in the Occupy movement, I would go to the general assemblies, and every time we went, somebody else would be adding one more thing to the platform of what our particular branch of Occupy stood for. And every time you add another thing to your platform, just imagine like a pie. You're taking another sliver of the pie out of like people who will stand with you. For example, there are many atheists here on YouTube, but if you say that you are both atheist and then have a position on being either feminist or anti-feminist as well, you're going to lose half your audience. Doesn't matter which side you pick, right? So if you are a feminist atheist, then you have these two beliefs, not exactly related to each other, but because you have the two, you would have collected all the atheists, which is niche audience anyway, and then have it by the atheists that came to their beliefs by way of like libertarianism, whatnot, and the shitlords, the Joe Rogan listeners. They're just not going to listen to you if you are a feminist. It's just it, right? Same thing with political movements. The more you add to it, the different movements that are intersectional, the more you lose people. I'd say Black Lives Matter definitely recognized intersectionality, and intersectionality is more of a household term because of that era in U.S. politics, but they still kept it focused. So leadership structure is another thing I'd like to talk about, because Occupy movement, they embraced decentralized, leaderless structure, which led to a lot of challenges in decision making and maintaining cohesion. But Black Lives Matter had a more centralized leadership, which provided clearer direction and coordination, even though people felt like their individual cities where their individual chapters popped up were their own flavor. I don't feel like it was possible for any individual uprising of Black Lives Matter protesters to be about anything really off the beaten path of, we're against police brutality and systemic racism. The structure of the protests that are happening now on these college campuses, it seems like they're following their cues from the original protest at Columbia University, but they are using different tactics right away in the first week, like going into a building and locking everybody out. That happening in a university in California. And also, like, different states having different laws about occupying in general. That's going to be a factor there. But I think that just trying to follow the lead of the first movers without having real connection to the first movers looks a lot more like Occupy than it does Black Lives Matter, which is possibly a misstep on their part. They should be a little bit more organized. But you have a lot of protesters who they eschew organization because they feel like all that communication can just be used against you in a court of law later. So, back about intersectionality. Black Lives Matter, they recognized the intersectionality of all various forms of oppression like race, gender, sexuality, and class, and they fostered this more inclusive and diverse movement compared to Occupy, which it really had predominantly like white and middle class demographics in Occupy. I'd say that there was a lot more diversity than, say, going to a Tea Party movement rally or a Trump rally, but still, as far as diversity, Black Lives Matter leagues ahead of everybody else. Now what you have with these college occupations is you're taking the demographic of people who felt like they could afford college in this economy, where just the idea of going to college, a lot of people are rethinking it. And it also slants very female, the people who are actually going to college. Now, as far as intersectionality goes, where these protests have popped up, location, mind you, the courtyards of these universities. It's different than the Occupy movement, where we were able to bring in a lot of people who were homeless to add numbers to our protest, who just, we were talking with them all the time, and they shared similar views. And so it's easier to hold down an occupation when you have somebody who's already used to sleeping under the stars every night. Just add a sign, and they're like ready-made occupiers of public spaces. Can't do that on a college campus where it's just necessarily not going to be in the same location that you have most of your homeless encampments, and the homeless people probably would feel very out of place being so far away from homeless resources, and possibly just feeling like because they don't have a student ID, they're probably going to face a lot more legal ramifications if they are trespassed. So, as far as intersectionality goes there, you're not going to get any homeless allies in a lot of the encampments that don't, end up like right in the middle of the city where the homeless people were anyway. So, that's a problem. And really, you got these people who can afford to go to college trying to bring in allies that, they're not going to be able to bring in a lot of other groups to just like bolster numbers when they're trying to protest their college needs to divest from, Israel. It's like, why would these other people care what the college you go to does unless they already care about this topic? And it's a little bit more of a stretch than either of the other two protests that I'm talking about, to like get people to care about this enough to care about your particular college divesting and go down there and do that. It's, you know. Also, college campuses are the property of the college, and it's not necessarily the same kind of public space that, say, a public park right across from your Capitol building is. It's a lot easier to get trespassed off of. So as far as the allies and coalitions, it's not just homeless people that Occupy had like an advantage with as far as bringing more people in. Black Lives Matter actively sought alliances with other social justice movements and organizations, and they were amplifying their impact that way, and had a larger support base. The Occupy movement, they got a lot of solidarity from various groups, but then they struggled to maintain those connections, especially as the movement kind of fizzled out in less than 6 months, right? People just weren't occupying, and especially like an advantage that this new protest about Palestine on college campuses and Black Lives Matter had, this really huge advantage is starting in the spring. Occupy first, the encampments were breaking out like in September, and they were strong in like September, October, and November. Then come December, you get some freezes that like, snow happens everywhere in the northern part of the U.S., and all of a sudden everyone goes home. Nobody wants to go occupy in the ice and snow. So starting in the summer, in the springtime, to go across the summer, BLM, that was a game changer. If Occupy had started in the spring like BLM did, Occupy would have been something that history books could not leave out, like BLM. But I see that these protests on college campuses have that advantage. Here's the problem. It's now the end of April. By the end of May, it will be summer semester in some sense at a lot of these colleges, but like it's summer break time, right? And so during the break, does an occupation of a campus that doesn't have school in session at the moment, or has less students at it at the moment, does it really have the same effect if you're only trying to keep your encampment right next to the college campuses to get them to divest? When it's in between semesters and people don't have to go to the building, why would they care if you're camped out in front of it? So media strategy wise, I would say that Occupy, for the first month, everyone was like wondering, why aren't the reporters coming down here? Why aren't we getting any traction? And Black Lives Matter, first, for just the size of their rallies, and the burned police stations and whatnot. I feel like they didn't suffer from a lack of news coverage. They were using social media platforms that didn't exist back when Occupy was a thing in 2011 and 2012. So I feel like social media was dominated more by Black Lives Matter as far as killing it there. And so what I would like to see is I've already seen it in a few of the encampments is live streams on all sorts of social media platforms. Not just TikTok. All the platforms. Just get the message out everywhere. But I saw the live streams on TikTok. Here's where Black Lives Matter really kills it. Okay, as far as just having a stronger movement, tactical diversity. Okay, the Black Lives Matter protests had a wide range of tactics, like peaceful marches, social media demonstrations, direct action, civil disobedience, and they were all tailored towards like specific targets and goals. The Occupy movement was primarily relying on occupation of public spaces to get a lot of different things, and each occupation had their own other platform things done. They wanted, a changing to banking regulation that would stop the way that the economy was fucked in 2008, right? They wanted the way that mortgages were bundled and then sold off as securities to be changed and regulated in ways that had not been a thing for a while. Look up the Glass-Steagall Act and how the original Occupy Wall Street movement was, related to that. But they didn't have flexibility because the only thing that they were doing was occupying. And so there were some marches and protests that would come from their occupation encampments, but like primarily the whole movement was named after the protest tactic rather than the reason why they were doing it. Which I guess Occupy Wall Street was close to naming the reason why, because they were naming not just their location, but like, the entity of like the stock market. But with Occupy movements opening up everywhere, like there was an Occupy Tokyo, there was Occupy Pet Care on Facebook, there was Occupy the Bible, there was Occupy, like so many different things on Facebook, Occupy this, Occupy that. When they named it after the tactic rather than what the original movement was about, they just left themselves open to people wanting to occupy everything. Which was also a Facebook group, too. But anyway, it had limited flexibility and sustainability. The sustainability part especially was seen in December of 2011, where nobody wanted to occupy anything in the snow. So with community engagement, the Occupy movement was originally like engaging in local communities and would set the bar initially as far as like supporting co-ops and food pantries and whatnot. It just kind of struggled to maintain any connection with anything beyond the protests that came from the occupations. The Black Lives Matter movement was like, it prioritized community engagement, right? They had people training people to speak to others about police brutality. And yeah, I feel like there were a lot of focusing on long term, like sustainable movement within the Black Lives Matter movement. And I can see where coalitions were built, where I can see things that spun off of the Black Lives Matter movement that are very effective in my own community. And even politicians who, on the grassroots level, are now, climbing the ranks in my own neck of the woods. So I really feel like with community engagement, Black Lives Matter was better at presenting themselves, did not come off as much of a joke to a certain demographic as the Occupy movement did. No, all three of these movements, they have an emphasis on policy change, right? The specific policy demands of Black Lives Matter were like police reform, criminal justice reform, investment in marginalized communities, prison reform, and I felt like there were clear legislative agendas that came from the Black Lives Matter movement. Occupy movement's demands were very broad and open to change in each different location. And that's something that I think I'm seeing the beginnings of in these college campuses, that they have specific things that are different that they want changed. Specifically, Columbia, where this is like started first, their protest, their encampment, they specifically, because it's Columbia University, want to have their university cut ties with another university in Tel Aviv, which is in Israel. And so it's like this sister university thing where Columbia has a lot of foreign exchange students who used to be IDF soldiers. And so they're like attending classes with these students. And so they want to see that, they want to see that whole relationship broken. Well, not every college has anything to do with Israel, which is limiting for this entire movement. Like as far as like Occupy had little local groups spring up everywhere. Black Lives Matter, things sprung up all over, right? If your movement is about specifically getting your college to divest from Israel, well, maybe your college doesn't really have much to do with Israel directly that you could point out, like Columbia University has. There could be funds that are from your tuition that are going towards some sort of research that also is somehow benefiting Israel, that you could protest about, like, hey, don't spend our money that way. But if you have a community college in Podunk, Nebraska, your college likely has fuck all to do with Israel in the first fucking place. Right? It's only these larger institutions, which is really limiting on like who would feel like going to their local college to protest that we need to divest from Israel. Even the term divest, right? There's an entire movement about like divesting from Israel, and it's one of those things where if you use that term, you lose half of the people who would be supporting you, because the more conservative people, they're going to think, well, that's a term that's anti-Semitic, because you can't be using your money to vote with your money that you don't like Jewish people, you know, and they conflate Jewish people with Israeli people all the time. And right now we have a lot of things in our Congress that are conflating Jewish people with Israel, to the point where people saying certain terms is now anti-Semitic rather than anti-Israel, like from the river to the sea. You know, there are probably even Jewish people that are part of the diaspora that's not in Israel that might be part of a protest that's where they're chanting from the river to the sea. You know, there are Jewish people who don't like the existence of Israel. But if you use the word divestment, it's become so poisoned that people who have been supporting Israel for a long time, maybe for well thought out reasons, maybe just blindly, they hear that word divestment, you've lost them. They're not going to be a part. They're going to be against your movement, right? I would say that there is a interconnectedness with the TikTok app being banned, or like partially banned, like the forced sale of it, whatever. There is a intersectionality between that and that being the method that a lot of people are learning about what's happening in Gaza. So as far as like cultural influence, I see TikTok culture probably being interwoven into this a lot more than, say, Twitter culture was involved in Occupy, or Facebook culture was. So attacks on TikTok specifically might look like attacks to prevent you from learning about what's going on in Gaza a lot more than in 2011. You know, for decades, people have been, you know, seeing pushes against social media and whatnot, but an attack on Facebook probably wasn't seen as an attack on everybody's free speech as much as the forced sale of TikTok law looking like trying to get people to not be able to use an algorithm that is spreading news that U.S. interests wouldn't want you to have. Back to the subject of divesting. It's difficult for me to look at Israel's interests and the U.S. interests as being very much different from each other. And we send billions and billions of fucking dollars in aid. And, like, if you are not liking what's going on in Israel, then and you are on a college campus, and in order to get a loan for going to college, or any sort of financial aid whatsoever. You had to fill out a FAFSA, so your going to college is connected to a government form with the U.S., and like the same U.S. that's funding Israel with billions of dollars to bomb the shit out of brown people, you are getting money from that same U.S. government. How far are you willing to take this divestment? Are you willing to not take financial aid from the government? I mean, it would be ridiculous for me I feel like for anyone to do that, but like truly, if you're going to cut off everybody who is doing anything to help Israel by sending any amount of aid, the first freaking people who you'd want to cut yourself off from and not have anything to do with is the U.S. government, right? And if you're getting a loan for your education from the U.S. government, it's like, why would you think that was not connected to the same people who are sending billions over to Israel? I think that divestment really needs to be well defined for this movement, and each location probably has specific things, but like, hear me out. Starbucks is hurting, right? Starbucks at the outset, after October 7th, they came out and said that, we support Israel. And so a whole bunch of people who learned about Palestine and what's happening in Gaza from TikTok, they decided to do a giant boycott. And so Starbucks started bleeding, hemorrhaging money that they projected that they would be making, but they were not, because no one was buying their coffees anymore. The thing is, aside from being particularly pro-Israel and pro-Jewishness, that aside, Starbucks supports so many liberal things. They just, they support Israel as a long-standing policy, right? And they see, attacks on Israel as being bad. And so they came out and made a statement. And then, their CEO came out and, said, no, well, please come back. We don't like any killing. Yeah. But, like, the damage has been done. Like, Starbucks hurting right now as far as the amount of money they've lost because of divestment and people saying, well, I can get my coffee elsewhere. There are a lot of allies that could be had in this that are going to be alienated. Starbucks, like, historically liberal freaking company Starbucks, they supported Israel after that attack without the full context being behind what they made in statements, and they're paying the price for it. And there's a lot of otherwise liberal organizations that are going to pay a price for supporting Israel, long-standing support of Israel. And there are politicians who get their primary funding from AIPAC and just like Israel lobbying them with the money that we're sending over to Israel in this weird Ouroboros snaking, eating its own tail sort of way, that, like, when people realize that, like, the number one contributor to so many different politicians' campaigns is actually Israel, and not just, like, Republicans, but like Democrats too. Like Israel is at least in the top five of like almost every politician, and so like if we're divesting, are we going to say, well, you as a politician, yeah, you've been liberal and you've been serving me up until this point, but now we found out that you take a whole bunch of money from Israel for your campaigns, so we're going to vote somebody else in. Is that what we're willing to do? Because, incumbents have a very good advantage. And so if we're going to divest from our incumbents that have been taking money from Israel, then when we have a new election and we're not supporting the incumbent and they still draw a whole bunch of votes away, like, we're probably going to give the victory away to the other side for at least one election. How far are we taking this divesting is what I'm saying. Like, because Israel is in a lot of things. Like, I would almost call them the 51st state, right? Like, and like an extension of the long arm of American foreign policy. That, like, they are us. Like, to say that their actions in Gaza is not us. I mean, the people in Gaza are seeing American-made clothes on IDF soldiers, driving American-made Jeeps and shooting American-made guns and dropping American-made bombs on them. Like, we are them. Like, yeah, they have their own quote-unquote government, but like trying to remove us from them is real dicey. Real dicey. Lastly, I just want to talk about like the longevity and sustainability of these movements. I feel like Black Lives Matter, 4 years into it now, you still see T-shirts. You still see people holding up the fist on a T-shirt. You'll see the fist, and you'll see it still has relevance, but I would say 2 years after Occupy, Occupy was just a poison word. Like, it was not something that people felt proud to be a part of anymore. For the most part, they felt like, they'd moved on, and it experienced this decline in momentum and visibility after the initial 6 months. And I feel like that highlights the importance of long-term organizing strategies. So, boycotting and divesting against Israel has been a certain type of people's mantra for a very long time, and it's just being picked up by this latest movement to support the people in Gaza since October, right? These tactics that other people have had, and I don't feel like the new people who are a part of this movement really click with the people who have been boycotting Israel all this time. Maybe they're doing it for a different reason. Maybe they just care about, let's kill less brown people in the world. So, yeah. They need to come up with long-term strategies that actually affect more than just a university saying, okay, well, we're going to discontinue this program which we were giving money inadvertently or directly to Israel in this way, so we're going to stop paying for that. Because once they win in their university, it'll just be their university that is divested. And things are so interconnected in this world, I don't even know that it won't be just in name only. Because shell games with money and, what pocket of money things come from, it can be a game as well. So, like, the long-term goal should be peace in the Middle East, right? Or world peace, right? Not just let's protest until we get this one piece of paper signed by our respective university to do this, this, and this, and then we just pack up our tents and go home. Because that's not going to create sustainable, long-lasting change. Anyways, those are my thoughts, rambling about this topic. I think there's a lot that these protesters can learn from protests of the past. And I'd say specifically the ones in my local area. They are suffering from the fact that April to October, over summer months in Denver, the police are allowed to confiscate tents and blankets. And they just ran into this problem, like, in the first week of having all their stuff confiscated. And they're, like, in shock. Like, I didn't know police could do this. Yeah. The mayor, democratic as he is, he was elected by a liberal majority, but he has this stance that once it's not cold, we're going to take tents and blankets from homeless people, protesters, anyone who's setting it up in public spaces. So they would have learned that from previous protest groups, had they learned that, they might have either come up with a different plan of how to set up their encampment, as far as, like, not take the tents out there at all, or fortified them, because it takes a roll-off dumpster to put all the stuff in. And Occupy Colorado Springs, which I was a part of, they brought pallets in and zipped them together with screws in order to fortify the inside of the tents, which made them a lot harder to throw away because they had to bring out more roll-away dumpsters. So it's a tactic, right? And I feel like maybe looking back at the recent future of activism could help out these people a bit in achieving their goal of not supporting genocide as much as they can.